There's a good fish right there. There's a nice bass on the jerkbait. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. On today's video, we're going to be talking about the good old jerkbait. So maybe you're new to bass fishing and you want to learn this technique, or maybe you're a seasoned angler and you just do not have a lot of confidence in this bad boy right here. Well, after today's video, hopefully you will be a better jerkbait angler. We're going to be talking about rod and reel setups, line, cadences, different places to be throwing this lure, and also the lure itself. So let's go ahead and jump into the video and let's get to talking about this lure right here, the good old jerkbait. All right, so one of the first things we're going to talk about is my rod and reel setups for throwing around a jerkbait. And I actually have two. Now, a lot of people might be wondering, why do you have two setups for one particular lure? And that is because it depends on where I'm throwing this. So this is my setup for open water and basically no cover whatsoever. And this is the Mach 1 6'9" medium light action rod. This is a 6/8-to-1 lose. This is the Tournament MP reel. And I have 12-pound test P-line copolymer on this. And this rod is a very light action. It has a very light tip. It loads up very deeply when I'm working this lure. And as I said, this is my open water setup where I'm not throwing around any stumps or any cover or anything like that. So I have a lighter action rod. I'm not worried about these fish getting hung up, you know, in any structure or anything. So that is why I opt for the lighter action rod. And actually, this is my preferred setup. I like a rod that loads up very well, has a very light tip to it. It helps me get that lure down. And, you know, in this cold water, if a fish comes up and nips the very back of that jerkbait, I'm able to pull it into his mouth and not rip that treble out and end up losing the fish. A rod is probably one of the most overlooked features when throwing a jerkbait. And it's very important that you have that lighter action, that more moderate action, so when you load up into that fish, you do not pull it out of a fish's mouth. Because this time of year, you know, the water right now is 43 degrees. The fish's lips are very, very tough. They're not really, really soft like they can be in the summertime when the water is warmer. So it's very important to pull those hooks into that fish's mouth and not rip it away from them. So my other setup, and this is the one that I like to throw around heavier cover, and a lot of people might be saying, you don't throw a jerkbait around heavy cover. Well, if you're not, you're definitely missing out. You know, throwing around stick-ups, throwing around laydowns, wood, things like that. A jerkbait is very effective. And this is the 6'8" medium fast, the Lose TP2 rod. So this rod isn't quite as limber. It has a little bit stiffer tip and a little bit faster action. So it actually doesn't load quite as deep, and it's just a little bit stiffer. But when I'm fighting fish around this timber and around this wood, I want a little bit heavier action rod to be able to get them out and away from it. There's always a little bit of give and take, you know, when it comes to rods and what you're trying to do with them. And this is the rod that I pick up if I'm throwing around a little bit of wood. And something else that's a little bit different is I throw 15-pound test on this setup. So that way, if a fish gets wrapped around a stick up or something, I have a little bit more strength in my line to be able to get them out and away from it. And I can kind of force them out of that cover a little bit better, throwing a little bit heavier line. So I opt for 15-pound test. The reel is the same, 6/8-to-1 gear ratio. And, you know, talking about the reel, honestly, for jerkbait, reel gear ratio probably means about, you know, lesser to me than any other lure, because you're basically jerk, pause, jerk, pause. It's not really a gear ratio deal. You could throw this on a 5/6-to-1, you could throw it on a 6/8-to-1, you could throw it on a 9/1-to-1. It really doesn't matter. All you're doing really is taking up the slack after you jerk the jerkbait down and you're working it. So gear ratio for jerkbaits is not super important. Definitely the rod is the most important part. And I like a 6'8" and a 6'9" as far as length goes, because when you're jerking a jerkbait without realizing it with a longer rod, you're moving that bait a lot farther than you realize. So you want to use a shorter rod. That way your stroke of the rod is actually shorter and you're moving that bait a lot less. You don't want to be moving this bait 4 to 5 foot every sweep. You want to be moving it, you know, very little. These fish are lethargic in the winter and you don't want to be ripping it out away from them. So a shorter rod definitely helps out. And something else, a shorter rod helps out in getting that bait deeper. And I'm going to show y'all that a little bit later in this video when we talk about cadence. When we're throwing it out there and how to retrieve it, I'm going to show y'all how to get maximum depth out of your jerkbait. So like I said, if you're throwing around open water, you can use the lighter action rod, which I definitely prefer. But if you're throwing around wood or stick-ups or heavy cover, you definitely want to have a little bit more backbone in your rod, so you want to opt for a little bit heavier action. Still a medium action rod, not that medium light, but a medium action rod with a little bit faster tip so it loads a little bit faster and you get that fish out away from that cover. But 6'8", 6'9", as far as length goes, to me are the perfect length for a jerkbait rod. So now that we've talked about the tackle, as far as the rod and the reel and the line, we're going to get into talking about the jerkbaits a little bit, and then we're going to talk about cadence and where I like to throw jerkbaits and the different cadences of throwing this thing around to figure out how these fish are going to bite and what is going to trigger more bites on a particular day. So let's go ahead and jump into that. All right, so when talking about jerkbaits, there's a lot of different choices. Literally every brand that makes a hard plastic bait makes a jerkbait. Typically, jerkbaits suspend when they go down in the water, and that's one of the main things that really helps it be so effective in cold water, is the fact that you rip a jerkbait down and it's sitting there in the water column. It's not sinking, it's not floating, and some do sink a little bit and some do float a little bit, but basically it's a very slow fall and a very slow rise. So we're talking about suspending jerkbaits. So this bait is very slowly sitting there right in front of their face, or it's moving very slowly in the water column. Maybe a slow sink like this, maybe a very slow rise, but they're sitting right in front of the fish and they're able to let that fish look at them and trigger bites. That's one of the main things that makes these so effective in cold water, is the fact that when you get it down there, it's not rising up fast away from the fish, and it's sitting there in a water column very slowly, so you're able to trigger bites with this lure. Now, as I said, pretty much every company makes a jerkbait. This is the Strike King KVD 300 Deep. This is one of my absolute favorite jerkbaits. I've caught a lot of fish on it, a lot of big fish on it, and you can see this has a little bit of a deeper bill. This jerkbait will get down to 8+ foot, and in the winter fish tend to be a little bit deeper, and jerkbaits tend to be more effective in the winter. That's why I'm doing this video right now. I want to help you all catch more fish. So this is the KVD 300 Deep. It has that little bit longer bill, and this is a shad color. This is a blueback, clear, very effective color right there. And like I said, this jerkbait gets down to around 8 foot. Your standard jerkbait is going to get down 4 to 6 foot. This jerkbait gets down to 8+ foot. So it's definitely one of my favorites for the winter. If the water is a little bit warmer, maybe up around 50, I might opt for a shallower jerkbait. But anytime the water is 48, 47 and below, I always like to throw the deeper diving jerkbaits. This is another right here. This is a KVD 300 Deep, and this is in a little bit different color. I'm just going to show it to you all right there. That's more of a bone color, a little bit of a purple back. That's one of my go-tos right there as well. And then, I have a box full of jerkbaits right here, a box just slam loaded. So I'm going to show you all definitely one of my favorite colors of all time in the KVD 300. And this is strobe shad. So this has a chartreuse belly to it, that purple top right there, that purple hue, and then it just has a little bit of an iridescent shine on the sides. This is my absolute favorite. I've caught more bass on this color jerkbait than any other jerkbait, hands down. Like I said, that's called strobe shad. That is also in that KVD 300 deep. And this right here, you can see I have a little piece of 3M tape on the head. I think that helps the fish target it a little bit better. It gives them a little something to look at. And actually, since doing that, I have gotten more fish to actually eat my jerkbait head first instead of nipping at the back. So that's a little sneaky tip right there for y'all, but that's definitely one of my favorites and my favorite color. And you know, the shallower diving jerkbaits, here's one right here in strobe shad. This one is all tangled up right here because I don't put the little hook bonnets on my jerkbaits like I should. But this is a 2-hook right here. We're gonna get it unhung. But this is a 2-hook jerkbait, so this is a little bit smaller. So this is the smaller size. This is considered a 200 size. So you can see it has 2 hooks on it. Much smaller profile when compared to the 300 size right here. So, you know, the 200 is what I would go to if I'm fishing shallower water. This is not a deep version, but this one stays a lot shallower in the water column. But if the fish are being a little bit finicky and the water's a little bit warmer, I do like the 200 size. A lot of people like to throw these on a spinning setup, and I do think if you're throwing a smaller jerkbait, you are able to get more depth out of a smaller jerkbait with a spinning setup. But that's absolutely a preference. But for wintertime, I really prefer that deeper model. And like I said, everybody has their preference on what jerkbait they want to throw, and that's 100% up to you. I'm just showing you the ones that I like to throw the best. And like I said, that KVD 300 deep is an absolute catcher. And that's a mid-sized jerkbait. That's not a big jerkbait. I would say it's kind of middle of the road. The 200 is definitely a smaller sized jerkbait. But one of the important parts is that, you know, being able to get that lure down in that 8 to 10 foot range. Because one thing I figured out is, you know, basically this time of year is 10 foot is kind of that magic number. Fish really like to sit, even if they're in 30 foot of water, those fish really a lot of times like to sit in 10 foot if they're sitting on upright cover or if they own a point. That 10 foot range is super important. So that is why I opt for that deeper jerkbait when we're throwing around this lure in that 47 and under degree water temps. So now that we've talked about jerkbaits, and you can choose whichever one you want to throw and whatever colors, we're going to talk about color a little bit. So specifically, I've went over some of my favorite colors, but most people, when they think about throwing a jerkbait, they think about only throwing it in clear water. And definitely clear water is really good for throwing a jerkbait. But people tend not to throw one in stained or muddy water. And I'm telling you, a jerkbait can be super effective in muddy water. So if I'm throwing in clear water, I stick to more of the clear iridescent colors, a little bit see-through, very natural, very shad-like, because those fish in clear water are gonna have a lot of time to really sit there and look at it, really analyze that lure, whereas in muddy water, they can't see it quite as good. And that's when I opt for the bone colored or the more matte colored jerkbaits. And one of the reasons is I just think they're able to see that a little bit better. You can't see through the lure, and it gives them a better focal point in stained or muddy water. So, you know, some people might opt for, you know, a chartreuse or something like that, or something a little bit louder. I tend to stick to a little bit more of the natural colors, but I still like the jerkbaits that are non-see-through when I'm throwing in muddier or stained water. So clear water, a little bit more natural, a little bit more see-through, and in stained or muddy water, I like that jerkbait to be that matte color, that non-see-through. I think the fish can pick up on it and see it a little bit better. So, you know, that's jerkbait colors. Now we're gonna get up on the front of the boat and we're gonna talk about where I like to throw this lure, and we're gonna talk about cadence, because cadence can be super important in really breaking down and figuring out how those fish on any particular day like that jerkbait to be worked. And it will change from day to day, but we're gonna go out and we're gonna talk about some of my favorite ways to fish a jerkbait. So let's get into that. All right, so one of my favorite places to throw a jerkbait in the winter is on a main lake point. Main lake points always hold fish all throughout the winter, and they are one of the best targets to throw this lure on. Also offshore humps, flats that come up, you know, maybe in the middle of a pocket, you know, kind of a main lake pocket, or maybe even on secondary points if the water's warming up and the fish are starting to push back right at the beginning of spring. But today we're going to be targeting main lake points and also some riprap, and we're going to see if maybe we can catch a fish on the jerkbait. But right now we're going to get into the cadence of how I like to throw this lure. So one important part of throwing a jerkbait is getting that lure down to maximum depth. So I'm going to show you all how to do that and get your lure down as deep as it can possibly get. So you want to throw your jerkbait out on a good long cast, and a lot of people, myself included, used to make the mistake of taking it and jerking your jerkbait sideways. Well, when you jerk it sideways and you keep your rod tip up, you're not allowing that bait to get as deep as it possibly can. What you want to do, you want to actually hold your rod out in front of you, and you want to tighten that line, and you want to bring your rod tip down just like that. You're really feeling that lure dig, and you're really feeling it get down as deep as it can get. If you take your rod and you jerk it sideways like this, you're not letting that bait get as deep as it can, and you're causing it to rise up in the water column because it's going to roll sideways and dart upward. If you take your rod tip and you leave it down like that, you're able to get that thing as deep as it can possibly get. And that's another reason that rod length is so important, because if you have a long rod, you're going to be hitting your rod tip in the water the whole time and slapping the water. So what you want to do, you want to take it, you want to throw it out there, and a lot of people, some people like to reel it down. If you want to reel it down a little bit, that's fine, but I like to take my rod tip, keep that rod straight in front of me, and really work that bait down. Start off with your rod kind of out in front of you and really work it down. That really allows that jerkbait to get as deep as it can possibly get. Now, if it hits the bottom or something and you want to turn and jerk it sideways to get it back up off the bottom, that is perfectly fine. But you definitely want to work it, get that rod tip down, start off kind of straight, have that line a little bit tight, and you're able to get that bait as deep as it can possibly get. Like I said, this KVD 300 deep that I'm throwing can get 8 to 10 foot. If I jerk sideways, I'm max gonna get it 5 foot deep. But if I'm able to take it and I work that thing down, my rod tip, and I'm able to really work it straight down like that, I'm able to get it good and deep, and as deep as it can possibly go. And that's how I'm gonna maximize the effectiveness of my jerkbait. You want to get it down where those fish are at. You want to get it in front of their face. And in this cold water, like I said, water's 43 degrees right now. I want to get it down as deep as possible. So that is the retrieve that you want to use to get that good and deep. So now we're going to talk about cadence. And cadence is basically how fast or how slow you move this lure, and then also whether you jerk, pause, jerk, pause, things like that. So what I like to do is I like to start off my cadence a little bit on the faster side. Now, when I say faster, that's relative, because we're not working it fast at all when compared to a crankbait or something like that. But I like to start off a little bit faster see if I can generate a strike, and then I slow down, you know, depending upon whether I get bit or don't get bit. So most of the time, my cadence, I'm gonna start off, I'm gonna, you know, 1, 2, 3, get it down. 1, 2, 3, let it sit about that long. 1, 2, let it sit. Just kind of like this right here. And I'm gonna let it sit. A little bit varied in between, but not super, super long. So this is the cadence that I'm gonna start off with on any given day. So say I fish for 20, 30 minutes and I don't get a bite, okay? So then I'm gonna start off, or maybe not even that long, to be honest with you. So then I'm gonna start off slowing down a little bit. I'm gonna start slowing down. So I'm gonna take it and throw it out there. I'm still gonna do that, you know, 1, 2, 3 to go ahead and get it down to where it needs to be in the water column, but I might 1, and I might let it sit there for, you know, this long, which is a little bit longer than what I'd been letting it sit. And then I might give it a 1, 2, 3, but I'm gonna let it sit for a longer period of time, maybe up to 5 seconds, somewhere like that. So we're letting it sit, might give it a 1, 2, and then we're gonna let it sit. I've really slowed my cadence down because maybe the fish aren't that active and they're a little bit more lethargic on a certain day. And one thing that Live Scope has definitely shown, if it hasn't shown me anything else, has shown me the fact that fish will move very fast in 40-degree water, way faster than what I ever thought, and way faster than what a lot of other people thought as well, because these fish will come up off the bottom and move very, very fast. But every single day is different. Some days they just do not want to move fast. They're a little bit more lethargic, just maybe not interested in your bait quite as much. You know, maybe a big fish is easing up there and really, really wants to look at it. You know, so day to day, things are gonna change. Just like day to day, fish bite different colors, they bite different lures. Your cadence day to day could change also. So that last cadence I showed you, that last retrieve, was a little bit more of a slower mid-range retrieve. Now this is a retrieve if the bite is just slow. You know, they're really, really taking their time looking at it. You know, I've heard of people waiting 10, 15, 20 seconds between twitches. And if you want to do that, that's good. Usually I like to max out at about 10 seconds. So, you know, I just gave it a 1, 2, 3. I will silently count in my head that 8 to 10 second range, and then I might just give it a 1. That's it. That fish is down there looking at it. That one little pop, all of a sudden he bites it, your line tightens up, and you catch that fish. So tightened up, might give it a 1, 2, 3, might give it a 1, and then I'm gonna sit here and wait another 8 to 10 seconds. And this would be on a day when the fish are not biting very good. Like I said, they're a little bit more lethargic. They're really, really sitting there looking at your lure and analyzing that thing, really picking it apart, deciding whether they want to bite or not. So that is the slower cadence, where you're waiting 8 to 10 seconds. So, you know, I have the one cadence where I like to wait 2 or 3 seconds between jerks. Then I have the one mid-range, about 5 seconds. And then for me, the longer range would be around that 10-second, you know, just waiting period before jerks. And you can always change up. You can do, you know, a long 10-second pause. You can do 1 jerk, and then you can wait 2 or 3 seconds. You can really, really mix it up, mix and match your retrieves to figure out what those fish really, really want. So now we're going to see if we can catch a fish on a jerkbait. We're going to work along through this little area, and we're going to see if we can catch one for you all and show you how effective this lure truly is. All right, so right here we're coming up on another really nice main lake point. So we're going to see if we can get a fish off of it. Like I said, main lake points are where I specifically like to target bass in the winter on a jerkbait, and this is a good point and tends to have fish on it pretty often. So we're going to see if we can get one right here. there's a good fish right there. There's a nice bass on the jerkbait. I was looking down at my graph. I threw up on this point right here. I was looking out into the deeper water, and man, this fish absolutely loaded up on it right there. I'm gonna tell you what, that is a nice fish on the good old jerkbait. And I'm telling you, this is why you should throw one in the winter. We're gonna turn around here so you can really see this fish good. I got him on that 300 deep right there. I'm gonna kick this boat around. But threw up here on this point, just kind of searching around, throwing out deep. I threw out in probably about 8 foot of water or so, but got him on that 300 deep. And just an absolute beauty of a fish right there. Beautiful, beautiful bass. And this is why you throw jerkbaits in the winter. Right there is pretty fish like that. So we're gonna let him go. Man, probably about a 3-pound fish or so, loaded up on that jerkbait. And I was working it where I had that rod tip down, really working it down in that deeper water. Just, this is a big open flat right here that goes down to the dam, and this is just a really good point that comes off on the left hand side. I hope I've been able to show you some tips and tactics to be able to catch more fish on the jerkbait. It is super effective in the winter, so be sure to throw a jerkbait around next time you're out on the water. I appreciate you watching, and I will see you next time on Gunfish TV.